Sunset falls over Kiowa Island, the sun sliding slowly across dunes, gilded like the ashes of a long day. At the edge of the windless green, the 55-year-old man stands alone, eyes fixed on the sea, where once roared the cheers of thousands the year he achieved the impossible, winning the PGA Championship at age 50, becoming the oldest ever to claim a major title in golf history. Over 3 decades, Phil Mickelson has etched his name into legend with 45 PGA Tour victories, 6 major titles, 3 Green Masters jackets, and the prestigious Open Championship trophy amid Scotland's wins. He is Lefty, the symbol of creativity, the one who could turn a shot from any dire position, and the belief for millions of Americans that time cannot defeat willpower. From sun-drenched Augusta to mist-covered Muirfield fairways, he brought inspiration that perseverance could make age submit, that a person could still rise from what seemed absolute limits. Yet behind the congratulatory embraces and thunderous applause, he knew well the price of miracles. Those years had stolen his peace. Psoriatic arthritis gnawed at every joint in his hands, turning each swing into a challenge against pain. He once sat through the night by his wife Amy's hospital bed, holding the hand of the woman who had just undergone cancer treatment, while his mother quietly battled the same disease. There were mornings he couldn't grip the club firmly, yet he still stepped onto the course, trembling but resolute. "I won't let the ball drop without trying," he once said. Every shot thereafter was no longer a game, but proof of a soul that refused to yield. Time had taken his physical strength, but given him something rarer, the calm of one who had weathered storms. And now, in the distant crash of waves, Phil Mickelson stands silent on the sand, gazing toward where he once triumphed, and wondering, does a miracle truly save anyone, or is it just the way humans cling to keep fighting amid darkness and the fragile faith left in their hearts? San Diego, 1970s. On the small lawn behind the modest house in North Park, a short-haired blond boy stands facing his father, holding a club longer than his arm. The father, a former naval pilot, tall, stern, says little, only nodding when the boy executes the motion correctly. Phil is right-handed, but because he watched his father swing left-handed through a mirror, he unconsciously learned the reverse. A random mistake, but also a metaphor for his later life, always going against the grain, always defying the natural to find his own path. While other children heard praise, Phil heard only silence. Mr. Eric Mickelson was not one to hug his son. To him love was action, not words. Every errant shot, every hasty swing, met a stern gaze, cold as steel. In the father's eyes was discipline. In the mother's eyes, Mary was worry mixed with emptiness, a tenderness with limits, as if she feared that loving her son too much would make him weak. Between those two silences, Phil grew up, understanding that to be seen, he had to do the extraordinary. Afternoon at Miramar driving range, his father points afar. "Hit it like you're shooting down a plane, not a ball." Phil obeys, and the ball soars through the sunlight, but turning back, his father only says, "Next time focus more." No praise, no pat on the shoulder. The boy bows his head, grips the club tightly, hearing his heartbeat pounding in his chest. Even the sound of the ball striking the club felt like a plea for recognition. The narrative voice rings out, as if that child were begging for something beyond the game, an acknowledgement that he was good enough. School was not where he shone. He was quick to anger, quick to lose patience, often arguing with teachers, and each punishment brought silence from his father, a sigh from his mother. The feeling of abandonment began to seep into his childhood like a cold wind through a window. There were nights Phil sat alone in his room, listening to planes roaring overhead, imagining his father flying through the dark, drifting away. He dreamed of standing on an empty golf course, alone, wind tousling his hair, but no one clapping. Only the sound of club meeting ball, a solitary haunting sound, like a melody for children no one remembers. Then he discovered something strange. Whenever sad, whenever feeling inadequate, just picking up the club made the loneliness fade. The golf ball became the only friend that listened. Phil practiced until sunset, hands bleeding. Mr. Eric stepped onto the porch, watching his son, but said nothing. Only when Phil was asleep, did the father quietly enter the room, tucking him in. Affection in that family was always given in the dark, never named. 1980s. When Phil was 14, the family moved to Rancho Santa Fe, a peaceful suburb where the grass beckoned like an invitation. Mr. Eric built a small practice area behind the house. There, Phil hit thousands of shots each day, each one a promise to himself. I'll do what Dad never did. He started competing, winning some amateur events, becoming his high school's hope. But that joy was always tinged with bitterness, because even bringing home a trophy, his father only nodded. Good, but you have to try harder. By then Phil understood there would never be a day. His father said, "I'm proud of you." And perhaps because of that, he craved the world's recognition even more. At Arizona State University, Phil became a phenomenon, NCAA champion, then PGA Tour winner as an amateur, something only 3 in history had done. The press called him Lefty the Prodigy, students cheered, and his parents sat before the TV, smiles half joyful, half hesitant. In his 20s, Phil thought he had finally made his father proud, but in the call after the win, Mr. Eric only said, "Good, but don't let it make you complacent." That statement, instead of encouragement, became a scar in his heart, so that for life, Phil never stopped proving, never stopped swinging, never stopped chasing a praise that never came. When asked why he plays golf left-handed, despite being right-handed, Phil smiles sadly, "Because I learned by watching Dad in the mirror. Maybe I've spent my life reflecting him, but forgetting who I am." That answer says it all. The reverse-handed child had grown up, carrying in his heart a thirst to be seen, to be loved, but choosing to prove it with perfect shots that left no room for emotion. And as twilight covers the empty practice green, Phil, the child swinging with the wrong hand, had begun the truest but loneliest journey of his life, the quest for the worth of a soul that refuses to submit, even if the world never opens its arms. Late 1990s, the golf world entered the era of Tiger Woods, seen as the embodiment of perfection, power, and boundless belief. On posters, Tiger was center stage, while Phil Mickelson, the one once expected to be his rival, stood at the edge, dimmer, less brilliant, but with eyes burning unusually bright. They called him Lefty, the artistic lefty in a world of safe players. He played with emotion, not formula, won through improvisation, not machinery. But that very thing made his career swing between genius and tragedy. The US Open, the only major he never won, gradually became a wound in the heart of a generation of American fans. From Pinehurst 1999 to Shinnecock 2004, then Bethpage 2009, he was always one breath from victory. And then, in 2006 at Winged Foot, the American dream turned nightmare. All week Phil played like fate's chosen. He led through 3 rounds. A par on the final hole would lift the trophy. Sun glinted off his cap, the crowd erupted, and Amy stood at the green's edge, hand over heart, ready for history. But the wind shifted. One swing, the drive on 18 veered off the fairway, the ball flying into the spectator tents, hitting a tree and bouncing out. The crowd fell silent. Next, a careless recovery, then a short pitch stuck in rough. When the final ball rolled past the hole, he stopped, hands on knees, face pale. The words burst out, "I'm such an idiot." Not blame, but confession. An America that had just believed Phil could save them from Tiger's dominance, now watched him collapse before their eyes. That moment became a deep cut in U.S. sports memory. Morning papers blared headlines. A champion undone, a champion felled by himself. Phil's entire career seemed to pause at that 18th hole. He shed no tears, but the look as he left Winged Foot, the look of a man who had lost himself, choked millions. In the press room his voice trembled slightly. "I know I had everything to win, but I ruined it. I can't believe it." When a reporter asked if he feared this would be his legacy, Phil smiled weakly. "If that's the price to learn, I accept it." But the lesson was hard to swallow. For years after, each U.S. Open return carried Winged Foot's shadow. Some nights, he lay staring at hotel ceilings, hearing wind whistle through cracks, recalling the fateful drive. "If I'd just chosen an iron," he once whispered to a friend, "everything would be different." But life has no mulligan for the soul. The price of boldness is enduring pain. On the range, Phil hit that drive hundreds of times, as if punishing himself. Each shot he imagined press laughter, crowd sighs, and Amy's eyes as he bowed his head passing her. "I'm such an idiot." Those words to him weren't about the shot but his whole life, always choosing the hardest, most beautiful but cruelest path. Though he later won the 2010 Masters 2013 Open, in every interview, they still asked about winged foot, as if history never forgives one who came so close to perfection, and dropped it. "I have 6 runner-ups at the US Open," Phil said on a TV show, "and sometimes I think that's destiny, to know the feeling of getting so close to a dream but never touching it." In Tiger's dazzling era, Phil became the symbol of imperfection, the hero who fails in the final second. But that's what made him loved. People saw in him human truth, that not everyone is born to win, but those who lift their heads after defeat are truly immortal. Phil still took the course, still smiled, still signed for fans, but in his eyes, the perceptive saw a hidden sadness. After winged foot, he confided to a reporter, "I don't play to win anymore, I play to escape the feeling of failure." Every swing from then was a prayer, every putt an apology to himself. At the edge of Tiger Woods' era, Phil Mickelson wasn't just playing golf, he was surviving in a world where the light was too bright for a fragile heart to stand. And in those years, amid cheers not for him, a different Phil began to form, quieter, tougher, and preparing to enter deeper tragedies. Life still held ahead. In 2009, as the sports world watched his redemption journey after US Open stumbles, a thunderbolt tore through the Mickelsons' fragile peace. Amy, the wife, who had shared every high and low, who stood at the green's edge smiling and opening arms after failures, was diagnosed with breast cancer. The news fell like a slash into his already scarred heart. In an instant, scores, trophies, million-dollar deals meant nothing. America, which had seen Phil calm amid thousands, now watched him tremble before something no club could strike: fear of losing the one he loved. The first days at the Houston Medical Center, Phil never left Amy's side. He held her hand tightly, as doctors discussed treatment plans, chemo, survival odds. Amy listened, smiled weakly, while Phil nodded, unable to believe miracles could abandon him so easily. But fate wasn't done. Weeks later, his mother Mary was diagnosed with the same diagnosis, same fear, just rooms apart. The image of 2 women on 2 beds, pale skin, the smell of antiseptic and steady monitor beeps, became Phil's most haunting memory. He sat between, holding 2 frail hands, unsure whom to pray for first. Those hospital nights stretched endless. Doctors' footsteps echoed in halls, rain-pounded windows mixing with Amy's labored breaths as drugs took hold. He wrote on a small paper, slipped into his pocket, "If they don't make it, I won't return either." Not a lament, but a silent pact with God. "If you take my most precious, take the club and my reason to live too." In the cold yellow light, Phil sat silent, watching the 2 women sink into drugged sleep, and he suddenly understood some battles are never televised, have no audience, no trophy, only tears. That summer, golf meant nothing. Phil skipped majors, cancelled contracts, left the tour to stay with Amy and his mother. Press ran photos of him at airports, small bag on shoulder, eyes ringed dark. America saw a different Phil, no constant smile, no proud fairway stance, but a weary man, disheveled hair, walking hospital halls with wet eyes. "I've hit thousands of shots to win, but now I just want to learn to hold what I can't control," he said in a short interview, voice hoarse. Amy, though weak, forced a smile each time he entered. "Remember the feeling when you putted to win the Masters?" she asked. Phil nodded. "Think you're doing it again, but with me as the pin," she said, voice a whisper. He bent down, kissed her forehead, tears falling on her hair. That was the first time he admitted to himself he was afraid, not of failure, but of loss. Losing the one who made every victory meaningful, the only one who called him an ordinary man in an extraordinary world. When his mother was readmitted, Phil was nearly exhausted. Mornings with Amy, afternoons with mother, nights alone in the car in the parking lot, watching hospital lights reflect in the rearview like a dying candle. In his notebook, I once thought the worst pain was losing a tournament, but losing to fate truly breaks a person. November, Amy's hair began falling. She cut it short, joked, "At least you won't hear me complain about blow-drying anymore." Phil laughed, but when she turned, he cried. Each fallen strand cut his heart. It was California's coldest winter, but in that room they held hands. Each night he read her old diary entries, about meeting at ASU wedding day, first child. Amy listened, smiled, fell asleep. He watched her pallid face, light reflecting off tears on her cheek, and Phil knew if miracles exist, they won't come on the golf course, they come from trembling hands still clasped in the storm. The outside world spun with matches, Tiger, win-loss news. But in the cold hospital room, Phil Mickelson fought an unseen match, a contest where the only prize was the life of the one he loved. Each time Amy called his name, he felt given another chance to fix everything. By year's end, Amy stabilized after initial treatment. Doctors said hope. Phil nodded, no smile. He'd learned Winged Foot's lesson, never believe victory until complete. He still stayed awake, added to his notebook, "If they pull through, I'll return, but not to win, to give thanks." That was the promise he carried through winter. A vow to turn fear into drive, despair into faith. And as 2010's dawn broke, a gaunt man, eyes ringed dark, began his first swing after months. Morning wind blew cold through the range, numbing hands, but Phil smiled. He knew every miracle is born from fear's abyss, and that first swing was the heartbeat of one finding his way back to light. April 2010, Augusta blazed like a cathedral relit after a mournful winter. Scent of fresh grass, early bird song, golden sun on azalea branches seemed arranged to write a special chapter in American sports history. After nearly a year silent for his wife's illness, Phil Mickelson returned. Thinner, face etched deeper with lines, eyes shadowed, but his walk strangely calm. As the locker room door opened, the grandstand crowd rose, applauding like welcoming a soldier from battle. Phil nodded slightly, donned his cap, stepped to the first tee. In that roar he heard not fame, but Amy's heartbeat, the woman who battled death 11 months, now at the green's edge, scarf-wrapped, frail but smiling. That year's Masters was not just a tournament. It was a trial between pain and faith, between a body exhausted and a heart that refused to surrender. Phil's first swing at Augusta that day was slightly shaky, but as the ball soared, the crowd exploded. He knew he was back, not to win but to give thanks. Every round was a prayer, every putt a heartbeat extending hope. The press described him as the man playing golf with faith. In those days, America seemed to slow down to follow his every step, and everyone knew they weren't just watching a competition, they were witnessing a miracle written with determination. In the final round, as Phil approached the 13th hole, the legendary par 5 with a pine tree blocking the path, he stood for a long time gazing toward the green. The distance was too far to risk, but he chose a wood. The shot threaded through an impossibly narrow gap, the ball landing on the green, rolling, stopping a few feet from the hole. All of Augusta erupted. Commentators nearly shouted through tears, "That's Phil Mickelson, that's the shot of his life." At the edge of the stands, Amy raised a hand to her mouth, trembling and smiling. Phil didn't know the world was breathing with him. He only heard the wind, his heartbeat, and the image of his wife nodding amid the blurred crowd. When the final putt dropped on 18, he let go of the club, looked to the sky, eyes red. Then without a word, he stepped straight over the protective fence, walking to where Amy stood. That embrace, amid the erupting crowd, brilliant azaleas, and a nation's tears, became immortal. They held each other long, needing no words. Amy sobbed, Phil cried too. Cameras lingered on their clasped hands, on the eyes of a man who had conquered not just golf but fate. The CBS commentator choked up, "This is more than sport, this is life." Millions of Americans before their TVs shed tears. To them it wasn't a birdie, it was a symbol that love, faith and perseverance could still defeat darkness. But right after leaving Augusta, when the lights dimmed and the emotional wave subsided, Phil realized miracles always come with a price. His body, long endured, began to protest. The first night after victory, he couldn't sleep. His hand joints ached like thousands of tiny needles piercing them. He thought it was just fatigue, but doctors said otherwise. Psoriatic arthritis, an autoimmune disease where the body attacks itself, a betrayal by creation itself. Just when the world applauds, his body begins to betray him. The narrative voice rings out, slow and heavy. Phil tried to hide the illness. He still took the course, still smiled, still shook fans' hands, but each morning upon waking, it took minutes to clench his fists. Wrists swelled, knees creaked. Doctors urged long-term rest, but he shook his head. "I still owe Amy a thank you." That statement, caught by a reporter, became the headline for an article, "The Champion Who Refuses to Rest." In the months that followed, Phil trained in silence. No media, no crowd, just his labored breathing in the misty dawn. Every swing was pain, but he accepted it, as if pain was the only way to stay alive. A friend recounted seeing Phil on his knees mid-range, hands trembling, sweat dripping, yet forcing one more shot. I asked why. He just said, "Because if I stop, the disease wins." At night he returned home, sat beside Amy on the couch. She was still weak, but her eyes brighter than before. She said, "You've done it. Now rest." Phil smiled, shook his head. "I'm afraid if I stop, I'll hear the fear return." Then he took her hand, calloused palm against frail, feeling two different worlds, one who had just escaped death, and one learning to accept pain to survive. The 2010 Masters ended with his third green jacket, but to Phil it felt like a farewell to youth, to a body that once knew no limits. He understood that from then on, every victory would no longer be a game but a battle with himself. From the tears of joy at Augusta, a new chapter began, one of silent pain, of paying the price for miracles the world still celebrated. Because sometimes, in the moment we're seen as immortal, that's when our body begins to break. And Phil Mickelson, who once defied fate, now had to learn to live with a new enemy himself. Summer 2010, just weeks after returning from Augusta, Phil Mickelson received the official diagnosis: psoriatic arthritis, an autoimmune disease where the body's immune system attacks joints, muscles and tendons. For an ordinary person, it was lifelong suffering. For an athlete, especially one who lived by every torso twist, every wrist snap, it was a career death sentence. The doctor was blunt: "If it progresses fast, you may not hold a club again." The words fell into a silence long as a knife slash across the chest. In that moment, Phil imagined the day he'd sit in a chair, watching others play golf for him. The thought choked him, not from fear of losing his job, but of losing part of his soul. The first pains came like undercurrents. Early mornings, upon waking, he couldn't straighten his fingers, knee joints stiff as if bound with steel wire, every step burning. Some nights he woke in darkness, feeling someone twisting his hand joints. Amy often had to apply warm compresses, massaging each joint, and only when the pain eased could he breathe steadily. Once when Amy asked, "Are you scared?" Phil laughed, voice hoarse. "Yes, but I'm more scared of a day I can't go to the course." He began a rebirth journey, not through fame, but absolute discipline. Every day he rose at 4 a.m., sat in silence, practiced deep breathing. Doctors advised cutting fried foods, red meat, refined sugar, alcohol, small joys from tours. He switched to a strict diet, took dozens of pills daily, and started meditation. "I never believed in meditation," he later recounted, "but when pain becomes a companion, I realized only stillness helps you survive." On the range, Phil returned to his familiar swing, but his body no longer obeyed. Shots veered, balls flew slow, the club struck the ground with a dry thud. A young caddy said that in those days, whenever Phil erred, he didn't swear or get angry. He just stood still a long time, still gripping the club, eyes closed as if conversing with his body. "This body has betrayed me," he said softly, "but I won't betray the dream." That perseverance became a quiet inspiration for the entire sports world. People saw him practicing in the rain, in the bitter cold, sometimes just to execute one chip. Once the pain was so intense he had to lean on his club to stand, yet he still smiled when a fan asked for an autograph. A reporter asked, "What keeps you going?" Phil replied, "Because I know out there, thousands are fighting their own illnesses, and if I stop, I'll betray them. But that battle wasn't just physical, it was a confrontation with the darkness in his mind. Sleepless nights, Phil lay staring at the ceiling, listening to rain outside the window. He recalled winged foot, the criticisms, the doctor's words, and the helplessness of not controlling his own body. Some nights he bolted upright, went to the backyard, gripped the club in the dark. Cold wind cut his skin, rain drizzled, but he still swung. Each ball contact was a vow. I'm still here. Amy was always there, his anchor on days he was nearly depleted. She brewed herbal tea, prepared diet meals, walked slowly with him around the empty course. One morning, when Phil had to stop midway because his knee joints stabbed, Amy held his hand, said, "If you can't run, we'll walk. If you can't walk, I'll push the wheelchair." He laughed, tears mixing with early rain. That love kept him from the abyss of despair. September that year, when Phil reappeared on the course, the crowd was surprised he looked healthier. His face tanned, but his eyes burned bright. He no longer hit with power, but with breath. His swing slower, more refined, as if each motion was measured in pain. "I learned to listen to my body instead of forcing it," he said, "and strangely, when I grew weak, I understood my true strength." Psoriatic arthritis never vanished, but Phil learned to live with it. Every morning, stepping out of bed, he told himself, one more day to fight. He completely changed his lifestyle, lost weight, did yoga, meditated, ate clean. People called him the disciplined man. He just smiled. "Discipline doesn't make me stronger, it just keeps me from collapsing." For Phil, those 2010 shears were a silent war. No cameras, no medals, just teeth gritting in pain, and a heart still trying to keep rhythm. But those days forged him into the man the world would later see, the 2021 PGA winner at 50, the one unbowed by age, illness, or prejudice. It all started on nights he meditated in silence, swollen red hands on his heart, whispering, "You don't have to be perfect, you just have to not quit." In the dim dawn light, Phil Mickelson's silhouette often appeared alone on the range, shirt soaked in sweat, hands trembling but eyes fixed ahead. The golf ball rolled slowly on wet grass, reflecting the faint first rays. To the world, it was just a man warming up. To Phil, it was affirmation. The body may betray us, but will, if strong enough, makes even pain bow. Summer 2013, Scotland's winds whipped faces, and carried the salty scent of the North Sea. On Muirfield's silver-grey turf, where golf history had seen the greatest legends fall, Phil Mickelson stepped to the tee box with a slight limp, his hand joints swollen from illness, dull aches making it hard to grip the club. Doctors had advised against playing in such harsh wind, but Phil just smiled. "If I only have a few seasons left, I want them to be ones where I fight." The words sounded light, but they carried the quiet desperation of a man who knew time was no longer on his side. Muirfield greeted him with overcast skies, and headwinds over 30 miles per hour. Younger, stronger players crumbled one by one. Grass burned dry, balls ran like they were escaping. Phil, once known for daring play, suddenly changed. He no longer played like a reckless artist, but like an old warrior, counting breaths to survive. His first drive missed the fairway, ball tumbling into rough. He sighed, bent down, gently rubbed his swollen red hand joints. Then, instead of frustration, he smiled faintly, muttered, "All right, we start again from here." The first 3 rounds, he played steady but unremarkable. British press saw him as a nostalgic name. "Mickelson's best years are gone," one paper wrote. Phil read it in his chilly hotel room Saturday night, set the paper down, and smiled. "Maybe they're right, but they don't know I'm still breathing." That night he didn't sleep. Hands throbbing, he iced his wrists, then quietly stepped onto the balcony, watching wind whip the course flags. He knew tomorrow would be the final battle between faith and flesh. Sunday, July 21st. Fierce wind, black clouds, spectators huddled in rain gear. Phil wore a turtleneck, hands taped, eyes ice-sharp. He spoke to no one, didn't smile. The drive on the first hole flew straight, landed softly in the fairway, the club ball sound ringing like a bell opening a rebirth. He hit each shot, as if it were his last, every step labored from knee pain, but eyes blazing. At 13, he struck a miraculous 3-iron, ball flying low through wind, rolling near the hole birdie. At 14,
He bent down, breathed deep, then sank a 25-foot putt, ball dropping gently in the heart. Another birdie. The crowd roared. A caddy later said, "I'd never seen him smile like that, a smile both joyful and painful."
By 18, Phil had surged into the lead. Wind howled so hard the flag nearly tore from the pole, but he didn't flinch. He eyed the ball, the sky, then whispered, "One more shot, perfect wedge, ball stopping 2 feet from the hole. Gentle putt, another birdie." A 66, flawless in conditions no one dared dream. As applause erupted in the stands, Phil didn't raise his arms as usual. He just stood, eyes closed, listening to victory's sound, both triumphant anthem and farewell. The claret jug ceremony unfolded under dappled afternoon sun. When the host invited Phil to speak, he held the gleaming silver trophy, voice choking. "I don't know how many more seasons I have." The crowd fell silent. Everyone knew what he meant about the illness, the betraying body, the short time all athletes dread. Then he lifted his head, smiled through tears. "But I know I'll cherish every day I get to stand here." America exploded in pride. TV replayed every shot, expression, sweat drop of the man who conquered nature and disease. But in that moment, as people called him reborn, Phil felt another fear rise. In the locker room, he set the trophy down, loosened his glove. Fingers trembled, purple, swollen. He sat, stared at those hands, the hands that touched eternity, now curling as if refusing to obey. A medic offered painkillers. He nodded, swallowed quickly, then smiled to himself. Yeah, every victory comes with blood. That night, he skipped the celebration. In the small hotel room, just him and Amy, she still by his side holding the trophy, eyes sparkling. She asked, "Does it hurt?" Phil smiled. "Yeah, but it's the kind of hurt that makes you feel alive." Amy touched his cheek, whispered, "Then you've won everything." He shook his head. "No, I only won today. Tomorrow I start again." Outside the window, Scotland's wind still howled. In the dim light, their shadows on the wall, a man who crossed the line between strength and limits, a woman who crossed between illness and faith. The claret jug sat quietly on the table, reflecting Phil's face, half light, half dark. And in that silence, he understood today's glory wasn't the journey's end, but a brief pause between storms. For all glory fades, only human will, forged in wind and blood, remains with time. In 2016, while fans still hailed Phil Mickelson as a symbol of will and faith, another shadow fell over a path that seemed untouchable. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, released findings from an insider trading probe involving Dean Foods, a major food corporation, and on the list of names, amid traders and investors, 3 words stunned America: Philip Alfred Mickelson. The name Lefty, once synonymous with courage, now sat among financial accusations. The press needed no judgment, just headlines. America's hero in insider trading scandal, from claret jug to dirty stocks. Those words cut like knives through his heart. Phil faced no criminal charges. The SEC labeled him a relief defendant, one who profited from information without knowing it was insider. He agreed to repay over $900,000 plus interest, but what he couldn't repay was public trust. For over 2 decades, he had built an image of integrity, family values, excellence. In one day it collapsed like a building in a news storm. Networks replayed footage of him smiling, shaking hands with businessman Billy Walters, the case's main defendant, as proof of guilt. Media didn't need truth, they needed a traitor to fuel judgment's fire. In the scandal's early days, Phil stayed silent. He didn't rebut, sue or explain. "Silence is sometimes the only answer when every word gets twisted," he told a friend. But silence also meant isolation. Major sponsors quietly withdrew, colleagues kept distance, and press stalked him like a ghost. On the course crowds still clapped, but whispers cut through the wind: greedy, dirty, disappointing. Those words weighed heavier than any illness. One evening after a round in Phoenix, Phil drove out to the Arizona desert, moonless night, only the small fire he kindled from a few dry branches. Desert wind blew through, carrying the scent of hot sand and acrid smoke. He sat there alone, watching the flames burn slow, listening to the wood crackle. The feeling of being seen as greedy, he whispered to himself. That's a pain no swing can drive away. Years of building an image of faith, now turned away by the very public he loved. He recalled the illness days, nights reading stories to Amy and the kids, victories he thought would make people understand his heart, all now seeming to burn with the dying fire before him. In the darkness, he quietly asked himself, where did I go wrong? He didn't deny he'd been careless, misplaced trust, but he knew well, in a world measured by money, one mistake makes people forget who you were. The next day, returning home, he found Amy waiting at the door. She didn't ask, didn't blame, just took his hand and said, "You're still the man I love, don't let them take that away." That was the only sentence that kept him from falling. Phil began withdrawing from the media. He declined interviews, limited appearances, spent time practicing in silence. Mornings he hit the course early, swinging while dew still clung. No crowd, no cameras, just the echo of ball on club in empty space. Each shot was a way to cleanse himself. Some days Amy stood far off watching him hit hundreds, until his hands bled, yet he didn't stop. "You're not practicing," she said, "you're punishing yourself." As the scandal faded, Phil returned to the tour, but public eyes weren't the same. Every smile, every wave, scrutinized. Reporters who once praised now waited for one wrong word to write another sentence. He grew guarded, quieter. In press conferences, he often looked down, voice low. "I learned honor is the easiest thing to shatter and hardest to mend." That year Phil won no majors, but he began to understand not every battle needs victory to end. Some just need you to stand amid the ruins. He focused more on family, took Amy traveling, taught the kids golf. Sometimes when Evan asked Dad, "Are they still mad at you?" he just ruffled his son's hair, replied, "It's okay, son, I just need you not to be mad at me." Once when a reporter asked about the scandal, Phil only smiled. "I don't want to explain. Let what I do next speak for me." And he did, kept competing, kept raising funds for children's cancer hospitals, kept appearing with a calm smile though the crowd hadn't fully forgiven. New Year's Eve 2016, he returned to the Arizona desert where he once sat alone before the fire. This time Amy came along. They sat quietly, gazing at the star-filled sky. "I thought my career would end here," he said. "But then I realized losing honor can be the way to find character." Amy leaned her head on his shoulder, smiled. "I just know you're the man who gets up after every fall." Wind blew gently, embers rose then died. In that moment, Phil understood honor isn't something others grant, it's what you hold in silence when no one believes in you anymore. But the darkness in Phil Mickelson's life didn't stop at financial pages. As his name faded from headlines, as flashbulbs no longer lit every swing, another addiction quietly dragged him down: gambling. It didn't come from greed, but the habit of a man who lived life in the rhythm of risk. To Phil, golf was always a game of courage and probability, of shots no one dared. And off the course he chased that feeling through the clatter of chips on felt, the roll of dice, the pounding heart of someone who believed he could control luck. In the years after the SEC case, when the lights went out, Phil often sat in hotel rooms, Sports Channel on, flipping through betting notebooks. At first small stakes, a few thousand on a basketball game, poker with friends. But like undercurrents, the habit quickly became a storm. He started betting on everything: baseball, football, even quarterly earnings of companies he cared nothing about. "I always thought I could win," he later said. "But the truth was I was losing time, losing myself." The chips fell in steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Each bet made him feel alive. Each win flooded adrenaline like a ball dropping in the cup. But each loss withered something inside. No one knew how much Phil lost: 40 million, 50 million, or more. The number didn't matter. What he lost, greater than money, was the years Amy waited alone for him to come home. She didn't blame, just stayed silent, as if speaking the truth would make it too heavy for both to bear. Friends recalled nights Phil called Amy from Las Vegas at 3 a.m., voice weary, "I'm coming home soon." But when he walked in, she saw him still in golf clothes, eyes red from no sleep. "You just need rest," she said, tucking him in like a child. In those years Amy carried a loneliness hard to name. She had beaten cancer but lost the fight to keep her husband from the dark. And Phil, amid noisy crowds,
always carried the eyes of a man who knew he was lying.
Then, in 2023, when secrets had nowhere left to hide, Phil Mickelson spoke. In a short interview, his voice hoarse and slow, far from the man who once made millions laugh with witty lines. "I've been addicted to gambling for years," he said. "It's not the money I lost. It's the years Amy waited alone for me to come home." The words rang like a confession. No drama, no tears, just emptiness in his voice. The emptiness of someone who had touched the limit of shame. After the interview, he withdrew from public light for a long time. No galas, no speeches, no ads. He spent time in therapy, treating behavioral addiction and anxiety. Friends said once Phil cried in a support group, hearing another man talk about losing his family to gambling. He whispered, "I'm luckier, I still have her." In the Rancho Santa Fe house, Phil started over, like he had after every fall. Mornings, he brewed coffee for Amy. Then they went to the backyard for light chips. "You still have your hands," she said, smiling. "They still do the right thing." And for the first time in years, Phil felt forgiven, not by the public, not by the media, but by the one who endured him most. In his private journal, he wrote, "Gambling didn't take my money. It took my peace. It made me believe winning was the cure for emptiness. But really, only love heals that." He folded those lines, hid them in the nightstand, like a reminder that sometimes the greatest loss is the only victory that helps a person find themselves again. The media, as always, reacted fiercely. Some praised his courage in admitting fault, others sneered it was just image rehab. But Phil no longer cared. He didn't answer interviews, didn't rebut. Every day he focused on small things: dinner with Amy, calls to the kids, walks without a phone. In a short blog post he wrote, "I spent half my life trading everything for the feeling of being recognized. Now I just want to look in the mirror and see a peaceful man." Someone asked if he regretted it. He answered yes, but not because I lost money. "I regret that while I chased red and black, Amy waited, and when I won no one was there to share it. What's the point?" That statement silenced America. In it was no grand philosophy, just the raw truth of a man who once had everything, chipped it away with his own hands, and was trying to mend it with love and remorse. One autumn night that year, Phil drove again to the Arizona desert, where he sat in 2016. This time no scandal, no press, just moonlight on cold sand. He kindled a small fire, watched embers rise, and whispered, "I've lost many times, but at least I didn't let the darkness win one more time." In the desert's whispering wind, you could hear the breath of a man learning to forgive himself, slowly, painfully, but utterly real. Throughout Phil Mickelson's career, some walked quietly with him through peaks and valleys, brilliant wins and brutal losses. But like every human journey, no one stays forever. And in 2017, one of the longest and most sacred chapters of his life closed, when Jim Bones Mackay, the teammate, who stood beside him for 25 years, officially said goodbye. From the early days when Phil was just a dreamy young man, to when he became a legend with 6 major titles, Bones was always there, quietly behind, carrying the bag heavier than 20 kilos, sharing every step, every shot, every decision. They weren't just golfer and caddy, but two pieces of the same fighting soul, one deciding, the other understanding without words. On the course, they communicated with eyes. A nod, a light shoulder tap was enough to say, "Let's go, we can do this." Yet after 2.5 decades, even the deepest sink can wear down with time. Tension, pressure, small hurts piling up over years. Bones stayed professional, Phil stayed friendly, but the silence between them grew longer. After a round in Memphis, as the sun was setting, they stopped mid-fairway. Bones set the bag down, looked at Phil, then held out his hand. No one spoke. They shook hands long, and only the wind through the grass carried the faint sound of a bond closing. Bones left, chose his own path, became a TV commentator, and Phil, who once said he could read Bones' mind from a single breath, suddenly felt lost in the game he knew by heart. "Bones wasn't just my caddy," Phil said in the press conference afterward. "He was part of my life. When he left, I felt like I lost my compass." The words silenced the room, but he didn't cry. He just looked down at his call-used hands, as if trying to hold the warmth of the old friend who just walked away. Then that year, Tim Mickelson, his brother, the former Arizona State golf coach, decided to set aside his own career to caddy for him. Tim didn't just carry clubs, he brought family love, calm, and the faith Phil had lost at 47. The brothers, one who had lived glory and scandal, one quietly behind, believing his brother still had something to prove. "I don't need anyone else," Phil once said. "With Tim beside me, I can climb one more mountain." They overcame shaky years together, and that bond led Phil to the miracle at the 2021 PGA Championship on Kiowa Island. The image of the brothers, hugging amid the chaotic sea of people after the final putt, is a moment America will never forget. Tim didn't cheer or jump, just gripped his brother's shoulders, and Phil, amid the roar, whispered, "We did it." It was a victory not just of will but of family, the thing that saved him from years of breaking. But like every mountain, after the peak comes silence. In 2024, as Phil turned 54, his body no longer quick, tournaments dwindled, stage lights dimmed. Tim, the brother, the caddy, the friend, decided to step away. He wanted time for his family, for growing kids. The news came gently, but to Phil it was like an old cut reopening. In a short interview, he said, "I understand, no one can walk with us forever, but that doesn't make goodbye easier." The day Tim left the tour, there was no ceremony, no crowd, just the brothers standing on the empty Pebble Beach fairway, where they had once smiled and cried together. Tim took off his caddy cap, handed it to Phil, and Phil smiled, eyes wet. They shook hands long, no promises, no commitments. Ocean wind whipped their shirts, swirling dry leaves across the grass. When Tim turned and walked away, Phil watched until his brother's figure vanished behind the clubhouse. That night, in the quiet hotel room, Phil sat alone by the window. Outside, waves crashed softly, and he remembered every face that had passed through his life. Bones, Tim, Ryder Cup teammates, those who held his hand in victory, and let go when he strayed. "No one can walk with us forever," he whispered, "and maybe that makes every moment worth more." He opened the golf bag, pulled out the old wedge Bones used to polish after every round. The grip worn, the face scratched, but the metal still reflected the faint yellow light. Phil turned it in his hands, set it down, smiled softly. "Thanks for walking with me this long. In a lifetime's long journey, you can't keep everything." Phil understood that better than anyone. He had learned to part with glory, health, honor, and now with the loved ones who walked half his life with him. But in that loss, one thing remained: gratitude. And maybe that gratitude was why he still stood firm, even when all around was only wind through the fairway, carrying chill and the smell of dry leaves, the scent of goodbyes, but also of a soul that had accepted life's impermanence. 2021. The Kiowa Island sea wind howled as if nature itself wanted to test whether a 50-year-old man still had the strength to fight it. Gray sky, sand glittering on the turf, white waves crashing far out in the Atlantic. Phil Mickelson, the man the world thought had passed his prime, stepped onto the PGA Championship course with a slower gait, slightly hunched shoulders, hair flecked with gray. At an age when most peers had moved to coaching, commentating, or retirement, he still carried the heavy bag, still bent to read the line, and still whispered to himself, "Just one more day, God, just one day." No one believed he could win. Younger, stronger players, swings like storms, eyes burning with hunger, they were the future. Phil was the past, a legend worn by age, illness, and years of mistakes. But maybe that made him most dangerous. The man with nothing to lose is the freest. In the pre-tournament press conference, when asked why he still played, he simply said, "I don't want my life remembered for mistakes. I want to be remembered for a moment I got it right." 4 days later, that moment came, but not easily. Kiowa's wind didn't just whip faces, it cut to the bone. Grass dry and hard, balls bouncing wild, every shot a negotiation with creation. In round 2, Phil led, then bogeyed 3 straight. Commentators sneered, "A 50-year-old can't survive here." But he stood firm, lips tight, eyes no longer a golfer's eyes of a man trying to redeem himself. "I know I can't beat the wind," he said, "but I can learn to walk with it." Sunday, final round. Clear sky but wind so fierce the 18th flag nearly tore. Phil in black shirt, gray pants, thoughtful eyes behind thin glasses. Every step was followed by the crowd like witnesses to a miracle forming. Rory McIlroy, Koepka, Oosthuizen, all younger, stronger, but none could defeat the calm of the silver-haired man playing as if each swing was a prayer. At the 16th, roars erupted from the stands. He led by 2, sun lowering, golden light on the sand sea. His approach from over 170 yards landed soft on the green, ball rolling slow, stopping less than a hand from the hole. The crowd exploded. An old man in the stands clutched his head, sobbed. A commentator's voice shook. This isn't golf anymore, this is survival. At 18, the fairway narrow as a hallway of fate, Phil teed the ball, bent down, breathed deep. Amy, his wife who had walked through illness, loneliness, tears and betrayal, stood outside the stands, hands clasped tight. He looked that way, nodded slightly, then swung. The ball soared high, cut through wind, landed safe in the fairway. Roars crashed like waves. As he walked to the green, thousands couldn't wait. They flooded the course, surrounding him like a flowing river. The scene chaotic, dreamlike, sacred. A 50-year-old man, amid a sea of younger cheering faces, lifted like a living saint. He walked slow, unhurried, unsmiling. On his face absolute focus. The chip to the green, perfect. The final putt, over 2 meters. He bent, exhaled, pushed gently. The ball rolled slow, kissed the edge and dropped. The roar of thousands exploded, as if the whole planet breathed together. Phil looked up, eyes closed, arms raised, and in that second, he cried. Not tears of victory, but of release. A reporter described, when the ball fell, he looked like a man who had traded half his life for one day of forgiveness. And indeed, in the golden sun, amid the roaring sea of people, Phil's smile shone, but hid an unguarded pain. He was no longer the winning golfer, but a soul just washed clean. The years of mistakes, failures, nights Amy waited for him from Las Vegas, fears, pains, all seemed to melt in the tears on his cheeks. After the trophy ceremony, Phil stood quiet, gripping the Wanamaker trophy, looking toward Amy smiling in the crowd. He didn't raise it high, didn't shout, just touched his chest lightly. When the host asked, "How does it feel to be the oldest major champion in history?" he answered, voice choked, "I don't feel like a winner. I'm just the lucky one who got one more day to do the right thing." That night, when everyone had left the course, Phil returned to Kiowa. He walked along the fairway, listening to the wind howl through the palms, the salty sea air soaking into his skin. He looked down at the sand, where thousands of spectator footprints still lingered, and whispered softly, "Thank you for believing in me one more time." The wind tousled his silver hair, and in the dim moonlight, his figure looked small, yet strangely radiant, like a tiny flame in a storm. To America that victory was a miracle, but to Phil, it was redemption. He knew he wouldn't have many more chances, but perhaps just once, to see his wife smile, to hear cheers not for scandal but for faith, was enough. In 2021, on that windy island, Phil Mickelson didn't just win a tournament, he won himself back. And in golf history, that victory is marked, not only by age, but by the strength of a soul that had fallen, lost its way, and still had the courage to stand up and face the light, even if only for one more day. In 2022, after the legendary Kiowa Miracle, Phil Mickelson once again stunned the world, not with a win, but with his choice. He announced he was joining LIV Golf, the new tour backed by Saudi Arabia, a fledgling empire with bottomless pockets and ambitions, to challenge the entire traditional PGA system. The news spread like a storm. Overnight, America's hero became an outcast. Newspapers that once praised him now blared headlines in unison. Betrayal. Mickelson sells his soul. The man who once made America proud now hurts them. Phil understood the anger. He didn't deny it. He just stood before the cameras, eyes ringed dark, voice low and hoarse. "I know some will be disappointed, but I chose this path because I want to be free." A freedom he had never had in his life. For 30 years he lived under the lights, doing what the world expected, saying what others wanted to hear, enduring every fall in silence. Now at 52, he wanted to breathe, to escape the system he had served to exhaustion, but he didn't expect freedom to cost so much. Right after the announcement, sponsors fled en masse. KPMG, Amstel Light Workday, all cut ties in the same week. PGA colleagues, who once shook his hand after every round, went silent or publicly criticized. Rory McIlroy, once a fan, said bluntly, "It's sad to see him choose money over legacy." The golf world split into two camps, and at the storm's center, Phil stood alone. In those days he didn't play, didn't answer interviews, didn't post a single line online. Cameras stalked him outside his home, questions cutting like knives. Do you regret it? Do you think you betrayed America? One day, when reporters swarmed the practice range, he only said quietly, "If I really betrayed anyone, it was probably myself." Behind the closed doors of his Rancho Santa Fe home, Phil lived in stillness. No more sound of club on ball, no more calls from luxury brands. He spent time with Amy, walked with the kids, read books. Evenings, he sat alone on the balcony, watching the sunset melt slowly over the California hills. In his journal he wrote, "I dreamed of freedom my whole life, but now that I have it, I feel lonelier than ever." Maybe freedom isn't a reward, it's punishment for those who don't know when to stop. That June, LIV kicked off in London. Phil appeared for the first time in months. Silver beard, gaunt face, tired eyes. Reporters described him as looking like a man who just came through a war. Stepping onto the course, a few fans clapped, a few booed. He bowed his head, forced a smile, but behind those eyes was a storm. Every swing seemed heavier, lacking the old confidence. "For the first time in my life," he said afterward, "I didn't know if the crowd was cheering or saying goodbye." LIV Golf brought him hundreds of millions of dollars, a sum anyone would dream of. But money couldn't buy back trust. He was paid in dollars, but traded in reputation. The media was harsher than ever. They called him the fallen hero. They dissected every word, compared it to his past, labeled it hypocrisy. Some nights, Phil sat in a Boston hotel room, turned on the TV to watch commentators discuss him, then shut it off without a word. Sometimes he wrote, "I wish I could go back to Winged Foot 2006. At least then, failure was my own, not a failure of trust." Yet despite the world turning its back, Phil maintained a strange calm. He arrived early, practiced, shook hands with fans, and smiled when asked, "Any regrets?" He answered, "Every choice has its price. I'm just learning to pay it right." Behind that calm was a man learning that honor can't be measured in trophies, and a career isn't written only in praise. Amy, as always, was by his side. She didn't interfere, didn't defend. She knew her husband was someone who always went against the tide, always tried to control fate, even if the price was loneliness. Once she said, "You can lose the crowd, but don't lose yourself." He just nodded, looked far away. That's the hardest part. LIV brought unprecedented luxury, yachts, private jets, lavish parties, but Phil didn't attend. He avoided crowds, ate dinner alone, then returned to his room. The young players, excited by the money, didn't understand his quiet gaze, the gaze of someone who knew all glamour has an expiration date. One young golfer recalled, "He told me, kid, when they clap, remember, they're clapping for themselves, not you." In October 2022, at a post-tournament press conference in Jeddah, when asked if he regretted leaving the PGA, Phil said, "No, because I found what I needed, time, but I also lost what I loved most, the feeling of belonging." The room fell silent. One reporter wrote, "That was the answer of a man who bought freedom with loneliness." Back in America, Phil went into hiding. He rarely left the house. Every morning he went to the small backyard range, hit a few light shots. Wind blew in, carrying the Pacific salt, reminding him of Kiowa, where he last felt truly alive. In a letter to an old friend, he admitted, "I don't know if I was right or wrong. I only know that of all the applause I've ever heard, the only sound left is my own heartbeat. And sometimes, it sounds like wind in the desert, empty but peaceful." 2022 ended with no victories, no glory, only the image of a silver-haired legend sitting alone in the twilight, holding an old club, watching the ball roll on the grass. No one cheering, no one counting birdies. But perhaps for the first time in many years, Phil Mickelson was truly free, not the freedom of spotlights, but freedom in solitude. A freedom that takes your breath away, but the only thing left after fame, money and praise, have all walked away. In 2025, as spring sunshine stretched along the California coast, Phil Mickelson once again faced the limit fate drew for him. During the first practice session preparing for the new LIV season, a seemingly harmless swing sent a sharp pain through his left shoulder, a dry crack echoing in the silence. Doctors diagnosed a severe rotator cuff tear, requiring at least 6 months off. At 55, 6 months meant a lifetime. Phil stayed quiet, nodded, then walked out of the clinic, his gait heavier than ever. When LIV organizers confirmed he would withdraw from the opener, the media again buzzed with familiar lines. Legend with broken wings. Mickelson time has won, but in the small Malibu home, where waves crashed steadily against the rocks, he no longer read the papers. Every morning Phil still went to the backyard, shoulder wrapped in bandages, holding a light club, practicing slow swings. Every motion was a battle, a deal between will and pain. Some days his shoulder went numb, and he couldn't lift the club. He sat down, looked at the ocean, smiled. This is fine too. At least I can still feel the wind. Amy often watched from afar, camera in hand. She captured every moment, him wincing in pain, then forcing a smile when he saw her looking. One of those photos later became iconic, Phil smiling in early sunlight, club in hand, but eyes closed, sweat falling on the white bandage. That smile confused people. Was it joy or acceptance? Aren't you afraid of the pain anymore? Amy asked. He shook his head. No, I'm only afraid of the day I can't feel pain from golf anymore. The shoulder pain was just the beginning. The old arthritis flared up, spreading through both arms, then to the knees. The long sleepless nights returned. He woke in the middle of the night, sat by the window, watched the ink-black sea, and listened to the waves. Amy stirred, asked softly, hurting again? Phil smiled. No, I just miss the feeling of standing in the fairway. She took his hand, felt the swollen joints under the skin, then sighed. But in her eyes, there was no more fear, only love and respect for the man who never knew how to stop. To fight the illness, Phil began a new journey, full-body recovery. He changed his training routine, practiced deep breathing, walked on the sand, worked on balance. Every morning before sunrise, he meditated, eyes closed, inhaling the salty sea air. Some days the shoulder hurt too much, he collapsed. Amy helped him up, and he laughed. Just resting a bit, tomorrow will be better. Day by day, pain by pain, swelling by swelling, Phil fought, not to return to competition, but to still feel he was alive. One morning the pain eased. He went to the range, hit his first wedge in nearly 3 months. The ball flew low, cut through the wind, landed in the middle of the green, stopped perfectly. He bowed his head, didn't cheer, just smiled, a quiet, tired, radiant smile. Amy burst into tears. See, she said, you can still do it. Phil looked at the ball, whispered, no, golf can. I'm just the lucky one who gets to hear the club strike again. The media heard, ran images of him practicing. A Golf Digest piece read, Phil Mickelson no longer plays to win, but to survive. The line stung many, but to him it was the highest praise. Surviving, he said in a short interview, is sometimes the only victory we can claim at this age. Evenings in the living room, his kids, Evan and Sophia, watched old videos of their dad. The Augusta embrace with Amy, the Muirfield drive, the 66 in the wind. Dad, when are you coming back? One asked. Phil ruffled the child's hair, smiled. When my shoulder misses the wind too much, it'll know. The kids laughed. Amy stayed quiet. She knew golf was no longer his job, but his breath, the only thing keeping him tied to the world. At night, Phil often sat on the porch, listening to waves crash against the rocks. He wrote a few short lines in an old notebook. I once thought youth was strength. Now I know real strength is smiling, even when you know tomorrow will hurt. Then he closed the book, looked up at the star-filled sky, and whispered as if to himself, if the day comes I can't swing anymore, I'll still go to the course, just to hear the wind. March 2025.
Doctors cleared him for light practice. No more long shots, just small drills, shoulder rotations, arm lifts, balance holds. Each completion made him grin like a child. One day Amy filmed him raising the club overhead, posted it with the caption, "The man who doesn't know quit." The clip spread fast. The golf world was moved, not by the swing, but by the spirit of a legend learning to slow down in a world that always wanted him to run. When summer came, Phil still hadn't returned to competition, but every day he practiced in Melbourne. Sometimes a few fans pulled over just to watch him hit in silence. He greeted them, smiled, needed no praise. To him, each swing was now a thank you, to life, to Amy, to the broken body that still endured, so he could feel the wind one more day. On the sun-drenched grass, a 55-year-old man stood alone, club in hand, shoulder wrapped in white, eyes closed. The sound of waves mixed with the soft thud of ball on turf, and in that moment, perhaps Phil Mickelson no longer thought about victories, titles, or the past. He only thought of the simplest thing, standing in life, breathing, hurting, and hearing the familiar sound no one in the world could take from him, the wind of freedom. When the lights on the golf course faded, and the old cheers lived only in memory, Phil Mickelson understood his life wasn't measured by gleaming silver trophies, but by what remained after the spotlight vanished. 45 PGA wins, 6 majors, 3 decades of peaks and crashes, all now just numbers. What he left behind wasn't in display cases, but in the hearts he had touched. Legacy isn't trophies, he once wrote on a scrap of paper, handwriting shaky, "It's grace under pain." That line wasn't just for himself, it was a message to the next generation, to Evan, his son growing up, and to every child who never knew his name. After years battling illness, scandal and loneliness, Phil turned his focus to what he had missed, giving back. He founded the Mickelson Foundation, supporting poor kids, disabled students, and children's hospitals across America. He never missed a fundraiser, even when his shoulder was still bandaged, and his hands shook from pain. One June afternoon, in 2024, Phil visited Rady Children's Hospital in San Diego. He walked slowly down the white hallway, where kids laughed in oversized gowns. A little girl asked, "Are you the golf guy?" Phil smiled. "I used to play, now I just play for fun." Then he sat by the bed, told them about the miracle shot at Muirfield, the green jacket at Augusta, and Amy's smile in 2010. The kids didn't fully understand, but they laughed, and Phil felt his heart lighten. Leaving the hospital, he whispered to the doctor, "I thought winning was making people stand and cheer. Turns out sometimes winning is just making a sick child smile." That same year, he launched the Lefty Scholars Program, scholarships for low-income students who love golf and science. Hundreds received funding each year to chase dreams. At the first ceremony, Phil said little. He stood at the podium, hand over heart. "Don't try to be me, be who the world needs." The students rose and clapped, but he stepped back, avoided cameras, refused to be the center. Later one scholar recalled, "He looked at me and said, 'Don't let fear define you.' I spent half my life learning that." Evenings at home, Phil told Evan stories, not about golf, but about failure. He spoke of winged foot, losing himself, starting over. "I'm not teaching you to win," he said. "I'm teaching you to get up." Evan asked, "What makes you happiest?" Phil paused, then answered, "Being forgiven, even when I haven't forgiven myself yet." In those years, the press called him the philosopher of golf, but Phil just laughed. "No, I'm just a survivor." He knew time spared no one, that waking without pain was already a gift. He still trained, still went to the course, still hit a few wedges in the early sun. No cameras, no crowds, just Amy and Evan sometimes watching. "You're not as fast anymore, Dad," Evan teased. Phil grinned. "Fast for what? I'm learning to go slow so I can see more."
In the quiet hours, he wrote his will. No lawyers involved, no fanfare, just a few pages on an old typewriter. At the end, he handwritten one line, "We only keep what we give away." The bulk of his fortune went to children's funds, hospitals, scholarships. Evan would get only a modest sum, enough to live without dependence. When asked why, Phil said, "I don't want my son to inherit money. I want him to inherit the reason I once worked myself to the bone." Amy, reading the will, teared up. "Aren't you afraid people will think you're crazy?" "If they do, I'm glad," Phil replied. "Because at least they'll remember I tried to do the right thing." One day, Evan found the half-written page his father left, next to the worn wedge. On it, a single scrawled line: "Legacy isn't trophies, it's grace under pain." He kept the paper like treasure. Grace under pain, the phrase Phil had lived fully for half his life. He had lost more than he won, but never lost his dignity. Late 2024, Phil appeared at a fundraiser in Arizona. He sat in a wheelchair, shoulder still unhealed, but wore a suit, smile as bright as ever. When the host introduced him as the man with 6 majors, he raised a hand to stop. "Please don't call me a legend. I'm just someone lucky enough to learn how to live a second time." The entire room stood, applauding in silence, not cheers but respect. That night, back home, Amy asked, tired. Phil looked out the window where moonlight reflected on the sea, smiled. "No, I just feel like I got to live a little more." Then he closed his eyes gently, listening to the wind on the porch, the sound that had walked with him from his first days to now. In that peaceful darkness, the man who once conquered the world no longer sought glory or recognition. He only hoped what he had sown, a smile, a chance, a lesson in resilience, would live on in others, longer than any silver cup on a shelf. Because for Phil Mickelson, true legacy isn't in victories, but in how a person faces loss, with gratitude, with serenity, and with grace under pain. Sunset fell over Pebble Beach, the sun bowing to the Pacific, last light draping a pale gold over waves fading on the sand. On the empty course, only one figure walked slowly: Phil Mickelson, silver-flecked hair, shoulders still bearing old bandage marks, hands freckled by time. The sea breeze lifted his collar, glinted on the crisscross scars at wrists and knuckles, every scar a story, every trembling tendon, a memory of years he traded his life force for something more fragile than any title, the meaning of living. No crowd, no lenses, no applause, just him, the wind, and the velvet grass underfoot. He bent down, placed a small white ball on the green, bowed his head, gripped the club, inhaled deep, then swung lightly. The ball rolled slow, kissed the edge, stopped. He smiled. No need for perfection anymore. No need to prove anything to the world. The narrator's voice rose in the space, like a gentle farewell. He had hit thousands of shots, but life itself was the toughest match. Phil lifted his head, gazed far where ocean met sky in the day's final red-orange band. He thought of everything that had passed, wins and losses, roars and criticism, illness, scandal, sleepless nights in pain, and peaceful mornings with family. He had been hailed as an icon, then buried in doubt, branded a traitor, then forgiven, stood atop the world, then sat alone in hospital silence. But at this age, he understood all glory, eventually bows to mercy. A child passed by, recognized him, grinned. "You're the guy who sank the putt at Kiowa, right?" Phil nodded, smiled. "Yeah, that was me, but now I just play for fun." The kid asked, "Did you win a lot?" He looked at the sun's reflection on the water, answered softly, "Nobody wins forever, son. What matters is you keep playing, even when nobody's watching." Amy approached, blonde hair fluttering in the evening breeze. She stood beside him, silent, then gently took his hand. They needed no words. After nearly 40 years together, everything understood lay in their eyes. Phil touched her hand, the hand that gripped his in the 2009 hospital, waved from the Augusta stands, held him up on the night his shoulder tore. Now that hand was still warm, still gentle, still the reason he came home every time he fell. He looked around, saw fairways stretching into the sunset, small flags fluttering like goodbyes, every flag a memory. The roars at Augusta 2004, cold wind at Muirfield 2013, hot sand at Kiowa 2021, and the distant sigh at Winged Foot, all blended into one, forming the complete portrait of a life, where glory and hurt stood side by side, not opposed, but completing each other. The narrator's voice, low, calm, slow: "We are not born to win forever, but to learn to bow before the sacred love, health, forgiveness." Phil Mickelson has been through it all: admiration and judgment, victory and loss, light and shadow, but in the end, he understood the greatest value of a life isn't how long we're applauded, but how much we can love, how much we can forgive, and how many times we can stand after falling. The sun sank fully, the last light stretched across the grass, casting long shadows of two figures, Phil and Amy, on the white green. The shadows intertwined, lengthened, then melted into the fading dusk, no longer champion and wife, but two souls who had walked through everything, hand in hand. In a moment time itself paused. Before leaving the course, Phil bent down, picked up the small white ball, held it in his palm, whispered, "Thank you." No one heard, but the wind carried the words far, over fairways, over the ocean, through the memories of millions who had watched him live, fight and stumble. And then in the blazing red sunset as night began to fall, he turned and walked away, hand tightly holding Amy's. Their shadows stretched across the grass, weaving together like threads linking two worlds, past and present, light and shadow, glory and peace. It was the light that knew how to bow, when a legend finally found what he had sought his whole life, not victory, but the serenity of a heart that learned to stop and give thanks. Perhaps what hurts most when looking back at Phil Mickelson's life isn't the times he lost, but the way an ordinary American had to embrace light while enduring darkness. When he whispered, "I'm such an idiot at Winged Foot," 2006, it wasn't just self-reproach for bogeying 18, it was a public moment of vulnerability, something win at all costs culture often hides. 3 years later, he sat between two hospital beds, Amy and his mother, both fighting cancer, then wrote on a small note, "If they don't make it, I won't come back." From that very room, the 2010 Masters Miracle bloomed. The Augusta embrace wasn't a sports photo, but testimony to love and faith. He kept trading with his body, psoriatic arthritis, nights unable to grip a club, yet stood tall in Muirfield's 2013 wind with a storm-defying 66. The 2016 honor stain, 2023 gambling confession, and 2022 live backlash, all exposed the hero in human posture, prone to error, prone to stray, but able to rise. The Kiowa 2021 Miracle, the final putt amid a human sea, wasn't just a title at 50, it was a forgiveness ritual, the man who traded half his life for one day of forgiveness. When Bones left 2017, then Tim 2024, he learned no one walks with us forever. In 2025, shoulder torn, he still said, "If the day comes I can't swing, I'll still go to the course to hear the wind." The lesson for Americans today: prioritize what no one can replace, family, health, forgiveness, and turn wounds into service. Will poured into children, lefty scholarships, pediatric hospitals. The handwritten legacy isn't trophies, it's grace under pain. That is the true legacy, not standing taller than others, but bowing lower than pain to lift others up. If Phil Mickelson's story makes you believe that even in darkness, people can still stand and smile, hit subscribe to join us on the journey to find more lights that know how to bow. Thank you for walking with us. See you in the next video, where we'll tell of another legend who turned pain into strength and left footprints that never fade in America's heart.